Hey folks, welcome back to Letters for Now. I'm Dan. As I record this, it's an early morning in late summer, and I notice a few things. The air is already a bit heavy, and I can hear from some neighbor somewhere down the road an early morning hum of probably their air conditioner. And in opposition to that, I can hear a crow that's calling from a power line somewhere near the house. And as I fill a glass with water from the tap, I notice that it's cold and filtered and clean. And I'm also noticing that I'm drinking it slowly in the shade of the porch, looking out onto the street that feels almost too still. And there's a bus stop down the road at the corner. It doesn't have a formal shelter, but it does have a bench that was built by a neighbor whose house it sits nearest to. And there's a public library not too far away. It's easily walkable. And it's getting ready to be bustling with community members and visitors, book seekers, and folks just looking to maybe escape the heat. And in the midst of all of this, it hits me that in this small moment of comfort, with my glass in hand, and inside there's ceiling fans spinning overhead, it hits me that I've been given things so many others don't get anymore. A home that stays cool, a tap that runs, a space to think. The peace of it is real. But also, so is the distance. We live in a country where comfort has become more private than public, where stability often exists just on the other side of a locked door, and where the very idea of the common good, once stitched into our streets and schools and sidewalks, now feels threadbare. If it survives at all, it's in scattered patches. A cooling center here, a food pantry there, but nothing coherent enough to call a commons. So what happened? And maybe more importantly, is there a way back? The story of private comfort in America is, at first, a story of hope. After World War II, returning soldiers were promised more than medals. They were promised a way to build homes and families and futures. The GI Bill opened doors, at least for white Americans. Mortgages were subsidized, highways paved the way to new suburbs, and zoning codes were rewritten to separate homes from factories, parks from people who didn't look like you. From the outside, it looked like progress, a nation in motion. Quiet streets, green lawns, garages filled with tools for self-sufficiency. But inside, that progress was a slow retreat. As more Americans found ways to secure comfort for themselves, we began to believe we could do without the shared parts. Why fund schools across town if our kids go to private schools? Why fix the bus stop if we've got a car? Why support the hospital if we can afford concierge care? Private solutions crept in, not just in housing, but in healthcare, education, even in civic participation. Vote if you want to. Organize if you have time. Meanwhile, subscribe, upgrade, automate. Make it easier for yourself. By the time the internet reached every pocket, the idea of the commons had become almost quaint. We no longer met at the town square. We met in comment threads and curated feeds. Each of us was the mayor of our own timeline. And still, something clearly aches in this country. Something is very much missing. You can measure the cost of money in the ever-widening gap between the billionaires who build rockets and the single mother who needs a GoFundMe to cover an ER visit, or maybe even something much less and much more mundane than an ER visit. But it's not just money. It's loneliness and fragility and the quiet erosion of our ability to care for one another at scale. Consider housing. Across the country, affordable housing projects are stalled, not because of cost, but because of opposition. Zoning boards and neighborhood associations block them with surgical precision. Traffic, shadows, neighborhood character. Meanwhile, encampments grow under overpasses, shelters overflow, and still the question is asked, why here? Or healthcare. Over 60% of bankruptcies in the U.S. are tied to medical debt. We live in the wealthiest country on earth, and yet a single accident or diagnosis can unravel a family. Private clinics offer escape routes, if you can pay. Otherwise, the safety net sags very, very low. Or labor. Warehouse workers are tracked by the second. Delivery drivers skip bathroom breaks. And all so that those of us behind quiet doors can have what we want, now, fast, and cheap. We've built a country where suffering happens out of sight, and we've made it feel normal. James Baldwin once wrote, "Urban renewal means Negro removal." That was the 1960s. Today's version is quieter, but just as brutal. Whole neighborhoods are erased by development. People pushed further from transit and work and their families, displaced not by violence, but by cost. We paved over the village, and we called it progress. But it wasn't always like this. In the early 1900s, Jane Addams, founder of Hull House in Chicago, saw public good not as charity, but as daily infrastructure for dignity. Her settlement house offered childcare, classes, hot meals, medical care, all under one roof, not just for the poor, but for the whole neighborhood. Adams believed that the well-being of one was bound up with the well-being of all. She called it social ethics. In the 1930s, amid the wreckage of the Great Depression, the U.S. built public parks, schools, trails, theaters. The Works Progress Administration, the WPA, didn't just create jobs. It created places for people to gather and to rest and ultimately to belong. In the dustiest corners of economic collapse, we built beauty for everyone. And we saw public comfort not as a burden, but as a birthright. So what changed? Well, I think the turning point was fairly slow. Not a single year or law, but a cultural shift. A turning inward. The language of politics changed. Instead of we, it became me. Taxes became theft. Government became the problem. Efficiency became the new virtue. And what was once called mutual obligation became a punchline. Or maybe a punching bag. Instead of libraries, we got Kindle subscriptions. Instead of public transit, we got rideshare apps. Instead of neighborhood associations, we got Nextdoor rants. As in the app Nextdoor. The public square didn't disappear all at once. It was replaced by algorithms and convenience and by the soft isolation of private solutions. And when crisis came, COVID, climate, economic shocks, we saw just how threadbare our shared systems had become. Hospital staff burned out, teachers quit, bus routes vanished, rents soared, and still we heard the same refrain: "At least I'm okay." Maybe I should better um, enunciate that. At least I'm okay. But comfort that isn't shareable isn't ultimately safe. And a society that can't care for the many is one disaster away from failing the few. So, what would it mean to return, not to some golden age, but to a future where the public good matters again? It might begin not with grand plans, but small designs for nearness. Imagine streets built for walking, not just driving, and shaded benches for people to rest, public bathrooms that work, libraries that are open late, cooling centers funded every summer, not as a favor, but as infrastructure. Clinics where no one is asked for insurance at the door. Parks where kids of every background learn the same games, speak the same language of laughter. These aren't utopias, they're logistics. They're budgeting decisions. They're zoning code updates and staffing lines. But more than that, they're moral choices. They signal what and who we believe deserves dignity. Bell Hooks wrote, "There can be no love without justice." And justice, in practical terms, is often nothing more than a shade tree, a bus shelter, and a place to go when your home no longer holds. There is no single fix, but there are practices. You could take the bus once a week, not because you have to, but to understand the system others rely on. You could give monthly to your local library or park foundation, or better, show up in person and volunteer. Live the experience. You could show up at a zoning meeting, not to block something, but to make something possible. You could water a tree, sweep a sidewalk, sit on your stoop and wave to someone you've never spoken to. You could ask, "What's one comfort I enjoy that I wish everyone could have?" And then you could ask the follow-up question, "What can I do to make that happen?" These are not savior moves. They're neighbor moves. So I'm imagining when evening comes. I started by noting that it was morning, early morning, as I'm recording this. And I'm thinking about when evening comes and my fan above still spins, and outside, slowly but surely, the light softens, and by then the crow is long gone. And probably a kid will be riding a scooter past the library, and its lights are probably still on. And somewhere across town, someone waits for the bus. Somewhere else, someone sleeps on the sidewalk. Not because they want to, but because they don't have anywhere else to go. And somewhere, someone sits on a porch, just like this one. One that is safe and quiet and well-fed. And in that, one might wonder what it means to be part of something larger than themselves. We cannot dismantle private comfort, nor should we. But we can ask a different question. What if the measure of a good life is not what we insulate ourselves from, but what we include others in? We need public beauty. we need visible care. Mostly we need each other. And maybe, just maybe, what we've been calling comfort is not enough. Not anymore. So consider asking yourself this week, what could you return to the commons? And then listen for what answers you back. Well, I know this was a long one today. It's something I've been thinking quite a bit about lately. And so I'm not surprised that this is maybe the longest podcast that I've put out on this feed. But if you've listened this far, thank you so much. Please consider commenting, liking, even better, sharing it, inviting some friends over here. As you know, there is no paywall, so you're not asking for anything other than, hey, go read this, go listen to this, see if you enjoy it. Maybe that little method of sharing brings our group some additional numbers. Not for the sake of numbers, but for the sake of growing interdependency that is community. I hope wherever you are, that you are safe and well-fed and grounded, and that those private comforts are ones that you can share outwardly for the common good.